you recap briefly the main arguments in your book, Shorting the Grid?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. I would say that the way the auctions are set up on the grid, they don't lead to reliability. As a matter of fact, they lead in the opposite direction. A nuclear a wind turbine, which goes on and off when the wind blows, can bid in at zero costs because they don't have any fuel costs. So in economic dispatch, they'll be chosen above a different plant. But of course, when the wind isn't blowing, you still hope that other plant is there. And so you have the fact that reliability isn't honored. And you also have some very perverse incentives, because when the grid is in the worst shape, when it's almost on the verge of collapse, that's when the auction prices go really high, because the auction prices are based on what's called the clearing price, the price of the highest priced plant you have to put on the grid, and everybody gets the clearing price. So when the auction prices are really high because you had to pull some old, inefficient, mothballed plant out of retirement to add to the grid, and you have to pay it a lot to do that, then all the other plants are making a lot of money. So they really like it when the grid is a little shaky. So there are very perverse incentives about reliability on the grid. There's two ways in which reliability is undercut by the auction system.
Your work is frequently referred to in various social media. Which topics in your book did get the most attention?
Well, I would say that reliability gets the most attention. I mean, because basically everybody can argue about cost, and there are plenty of arguments. But when you get right down to it, cost matters for many things. For example, if high-priced electricity will not be used by industry, so if you have high-priced electricity, your industry is likely to leave, and we can sort of see that happening with Germany. But most people, when you get right down to it, they just want the lights to go on. And I read this thing the other day. I don't have it in front of me, but he said, "Well, I'm really tired of having things go off, not being able to turn them back on again. When I get them turned on, I have to reset all the clocks. And while I don't have them on, I've got to start up my generator because my mother's oxygen system depends on electricity." So, I mean, so this is a kind of what you might, not a poor person, not a rich person, just a regular person trying to live his life. He's married, he has kids, and his mother lives with him, and she's on oxygen. And, electricity is so essential. It's so essential for living a healthy life. So I guess that's what I get most of the talk about, reliability.
We already touched upon the perverse incentives of the current power market system. And another thing that stood out to me in your book is the picture you draw of traditional coal and nuclear power plants, and they're hardly making a profit anymore. And what happened here? And who would you say are the biggest winners of the current power market system?
Oh, very clearly, biggest winners are renewables and natural gas. As a matter of fact, in more recent writing and more recent talks, I've talked about a fatal trifecta that happens. And the fatal trifecta equals that some area, say a country, decides, oh, we're going to go renewables. And so they build a lot of renewables, and they give the renewables enough subsidies so that they don't have to pay. First of all, they don't have to pay for fuel. And secondly, there's subsidies for other things. And so they can bid in at zero to the auction. So they're always chosen. So if they're available, they're online. And then the next group that wins is natural gas. Why does natural gas win? It's so good for backing up renewables. It's just great because when the renewable goes offline, the natural gas can come up to speed very quickly. Now, another thing that can come up to speed very quickly is a hydro plant. On the other hand, steam plants such as coal and nuclear, they can't respond very quickly. They can follow load. In France, they have mostly nuclear plants, and it follows load. So if the requirements go up on the grid, the nuclear plant can rise to meet it or fall back to meet it. But they can't go like this, oh, the wind died down, better get online. And that's what a gas plant can do. A gas turbine, the closest analogy is a jet engine. And yeah.
Let's go a bit more into nuclear power, and what's the outlook for nuclear power plants in the US and the rest of the world at this point?
Well, the outlook is getting better because the US has, people in the US were at first like, oh, we have to shut down every nuclear plant we can. And then they began running into, do we have enough natural gas to back up all the renewables and so forth. And so now there's movements afoot to keep nuclear plants going. For example, completely unbelievable to me, but I'm glad to hear it. There's a nuclear plant in our state of Michigan that was shut down, and now the NRC and the governor of the state are trying to bring it back and keep it running because Michigan will have more problems in meeting load than if it isn't available. You understand that we're doing a lot of crazy things in a way. We're shutting down nuclear plants. We're shutting down coal plants, which are very, very steady, both of them. Obviously, coal has some disadvantages that nuclear doesn't. I'm a big nuclear booster. But at any rate, one of the things about that is that at the same time, we're trying to electrify everything. So we're growing the amount of demand we have on the grid. We're gonna have electric cars. We're gonna have heat pumps. We're all kinds of areas that didn't used to be electric, that were straight up fossil fuels like heating your home, are going to be electric now. But we're shutting down the steadiest plants. So we're trying to keep all this going with a mixture of natural gas and renewables.
And how compatible are nuclear power plants with the current energy market? Because we know that, because you mentioned that we can extend the lifetime of existing nuclear plants, but how about building new ones? I mean, they are capital intensive and they have long lead times. And how is that possible in the current power market system?
Well, it isn't, to be blunt, and I'm going to tell you that the places that are building new nuclear plants don't have the auction system that I write about in Shorting the Grid. They have more traditional systems where they can call on the entire grid to support the building of the plant, or they can call on the government to support the building of the plant, or whatever. So the auction system makes it very, very difficult to run a nuclear plant because they are capital intensive. On the other hand, people are just so crazy about this thing called levelized cost of electricity, and they say, oh, levelized cost of electricity. Well, it has a lot of assumptions in it. It assumes that the cost of a certain power plant doesn't have much of effect on the cost of the grid. But of course, if you put a whole lot of wind turbines up, you better have to have a whole lot of natural gas plants to back them up. So if you say, oh, wind turbines are cheap, look at somebody's going to have to say, and what do you do with it when the wind isn't blowing? Or what are the plans that you put in place for that? And do they count against the cost of the wind turbines? Et cetera.
You already touched upon natural gas, and we are well aware that natural gas is cheap in the United States and has a great potential both in terms of attracting energy-intensive industry and in terms of LNG exports. And what do you see natural gas? Where do you see natural gas going in terms of price and use this decade?
Well, I think it'll be used more and more. And in terms of price, if you have it and you're willing to build a pipeline, it's going to stay relatively, look, I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm just saying my opinion here, but I think it's going to stay relatively low in price, but the price may get higher because if you can sell it as LNG, you're going to make more profit, even though you have to put a lot of energy into it to turn it into LNG. But you take it over to Europe, and LNG is much more expensive than pipeline gas. And so some of that goes back to the producer. Some of that extra profit goes back to the producer. And I feel that people are overestimating how much natural gas you can use, even in an area where you have natural gas, because pipelines are very hard to build. I mean, not physically hard to build, but to get all the permits and everything, it's not easy.
You also mentioned that the current power market system relies a lot on just-in-time deliveries.
Yes.
That don't build inventories. And now in recent years, after you wrote your book, we also got that additional geopolitical aspect of this, that
Yes.
our supply may come from countries we're not friends with. So where is this going? Are we going to continue with the just-in-time mentality in power market and elsewhere, or do you see any sign that we need to change our way of thinking and stockpile?
Well, the most secure kind of thing you can have for a power plant is fuel stored on site. If you're looking at renewables, you're looking at when are they available. If you're looking at gas, you're looking at a pipeline, and there are many reasons why a power plant won't be able to get gas from a pipeline, from bad actors like you see in with the Nord Stream pipelines blowing up, to just the fact that here in the Northeast, the homes, quite rightly, have priority on natural gas. And so if it's a real cold snap, power plants won't have enough natural gas. Where do I see it all going? I think people are going to have to come to their senses about building pipelines, and they're also going to have to come to their senses about people are running around saying, oh, baseload, that's your grandfather's grid. Now we need a flexible grid. Well, every study I've seen of a major area, and the major area that's been studied most often is New York State, shows that about 60% of the electricity that's used is electricity that's on 24 hours a day. It's baseload. And the load following is maybe 40%, and that's not on all the time. So anyway, I think we're going to have to face reality about where we are using electricity, whether or not we're going to build pipelines, why we're shutting down nuclear and stop doing that, and so forth.
We also talked a bit about renewables already, and could you update us a bit on the current subsidy benefits that the renewables enjoy? I mean, back maybe 10 years ago, the idea was that these feed-in tariffs and so on, various subsidies would be phased out with time. And where do we stand now, nearly 10 years later?
Well, if the renewables continue to be used, they will be used with subsidies. And I mean, you can read, you can look at a capitalist like Warren Buffett, who said that the only reason to build wind turbines was for the tax credits. I mean, he's quoted as that quite often. I think I quote him in my book at that. Or you can look at more left wing things. I just finished a book called The Price is Wrong, which is by a very leftist author, Christopher. I think his last name is Christopher. Anyway, I'll look it up. Just to give me half a second here. But he's also saying, without the subsidies, the renewables would go away. They just simply can't do it. So the subsidies aren't going to go away as long as people are really determined to have as many renewables on the grid as they can get into the grid.
So when we look at the big picture, the last years, we see an economic condition which is deteriorating in Western countries, and we also see suggestions that the green transition will fail. And how does it look from where you stand?
Well, I don't think there's going to be a real green transition. I mean, if you look at most areas of the world, wind turbines and solar have been added on to fossil fuels and nuclear. They haven't replaced very much of it. I mean, I think I'd have to look this up. I'm not ready for it, the question, but as I understand it, the worldwide use of renewables has been used to be 6%, and now it's gone all the way up to 8% or something like that. So it's not like the fossil and nuclear are just going away, man, because all these renewables are flooding into the market and taking over their market share. It just, for 10 years, that 2 or 3% increase in renewables is not much of a show, really.
And also, we talked a bit about base load and power density. And if we look at the last 200 years, we see a tremendous growth in economic activity, population growth, and it seems it's all growing on the back on cheaper and more effective energy sources. And
Yes.
Now suddenly we are turning on to renewables, which are lower in density than nuclear and gas, oil and gas. So I mean, where are we going with this? What's going to be the consequence of this change? I mean,
well, it's going to be a consequence that the countries that are like, okay, I'm okay with oil and gas and coal, countries that are what people might call emerging economies, India, China, Indonesia, they're going to add renewables, but they're not giving up their coal. They are not giving up their coal. They want to have a prosperous life for their people. And so basically, if you really look at the percentage of people who live in like Europe and North America and Japan, what you might call the wealthy nations of Australia. I mean, I could add, but what I'm trying to say is, if you look at those nations, they're not a huge number of people, and I think they're going to be left behind by the nations that really want to grow and get somewhere, and are willing to do whatever it takes to do that.
Let's talk a bit about the grids. And could you give us a quick walkthrough of the different parts of the grid and which parts are in the greatest need of investment at this point?
That's a really good question, and it's a complex question. Okay, the three parts of the grid. they're pretty straightforward. You've got generators that make electricity. You've got transmission that gets it where it needs to go over long distances. And then you've got distribution, which is basically the lines you see outside your house, the substation you see near your house, and so forth and so on. One of the differences between the transmission and distribution is that transmission, they try to have, they not always succeed, but they try to have what's called N-1, so that if a major power line goes down, some other power lines can pick up the slack. In distribution, it's more like a tree. It's not like a network. It's like a tree. You know, if something happens at your substation, your whole block is down. There's no other way to get the power to your block. But that's okay because it's just your block, you know, and transmission is a bigger deal. So what do I see is so those are the three parts. Now, the second question you ask is what needs to be invested in. Now, let me say that there's complications with this, because the thing is what's being invested in with power plants in the West with generating power is renewables plus natural gas. That's not a good thing. I mean, we should be investing in nuclear and having renewables plus natural gas plus hydro on top of the nuclear. You know, in other words, for load following, and have nuclear for base load. And that is assuming that people want to have a low carbon emitting grid. If you go to other areas of the world, for example, China and India, they're building renewables, absolutely, but they're not giving up their high carbon emitting parts of the grid. They're building more of them, actually. So I think that we will end up not doing as well as some of the emerging parts because we're so busy trying to be pure about our grid that we're not being realistic about it. I mean, what I mean by realistic is we need nuclear for baseload, and then there are people who are fighting nuclear just as hard as they can.
Hmm. Could you go a bit more into the different parts of the grid and where that you see the biggest investment need?
Oh, the biggest investment need. I didn't get to that, did I? Very bad of me. I think we need investment in generation if we're going to electrify everything, and we need investment in distribution, because many of the distribution around here, at least up here in Vermont, I mean, the poles and the lines and everything, they're 80 years old. I mean, and you know, they have a long lifetime, but it's not infinite. I mean, poles degrade, lines degrade over time. So we're going to have to invest in distribution. Now, the next question is, are we going to have to invest in transmission? Of course, everybody talks about the fact we have to invest in transmission. It has the same problem as distribution. It's pretty old. But one of the things that is kind of not so great about the invest in transmission world is that if you were investing, let's say you had a coal plant and you built another coal plant next to it, the investment in transmission would be something, but it wouldn't be like, oh, we need more rights of way, because you would just build taller transmission lines where you have them already. What's happening is that we're putting a lot of renewables out in areas where people don't live. And the reasons for that is, first of all, most people don't like to live in very windy areas, let's say, okay? So wind turbines tend to be where people aren't living. And the other thing is you need a lot of room for them. So you even if people were crazy about them, you wouldn't want to be buying land in Manhattan to build them. It's a little expensive in Manhattan. So basically, you're building renewables very far from the load, and so when people say, oh, we need to invest in transmission, I'm always trying to figure out, are they talking about the fact that California didn't invest in clearing trees from their transmission lines? Are they talking about the fact that transmission lines are old and some of them have begun to like sag some as or are they talking about we've got to invest in getting transmission lines to wind turbines that are way in the north of our country, and all our people are way in the south?
What kind of sums are we talking about in terms of investment needs in the US, for example?
Oh, I just don't want to go there. I'd be just guessing, but they talk about trillions of dollars for investment in transmission lines. They're talking about that. And as I say, when someone says we need trillions of dollars investment, I would have to do a little research project on what percentage of that investment is replacing and refurbishing existing lines, and what percentage is bringing new lines from for intermittent power from some part of the country where nobody lives.
And since you wrote your book, have you seen any improvement in terms of updating the transmission grid and the distribution part?
Oh yeah, I think people are much more aware of it now. I mean, one of the things is that when my book was published, it was quite a while ago, in October 2020, and in February 2021, Winter Storm Uri knocked out a lot of Texas for days. And I mean, hundreds of people died. I've seen estimates between 200 and 700. But at any rate, one of the people called me up and said, hey, Meredith, that was great marketing. How did you arrange for Winter Storm Uri? I said, no, I didn't arrange for it. But I will say that as more extensive blackouts come because of not having enough power lines, or investing in power lines to bring renewables in rather than keeping up the power lines that have the reliable power plants on them. It becomes, people are beginning to say it. Also, of course, the IRA Act was very much investing in transmission. Again, I think the act is 1,300 pages long, and I don't have the time or energy to figure out what percentage of it is about new transmission to renewables and what percentage is actually upgrading existing transmission so that it doesn't fail us.
So when you published your book, you had some, I think you wrote that a stable energy supply, that's something mom and dad had when they were young. You wrote something like that, and that was a pretty dramatic statement. And I mean, since you wrote the book, are we continuing on that road to deteriorate towards an even more deteriorating supply, or what's happened since? Is it worse now?
I think it's worse now, and I'm going to also say that when I wrote the book, I said that if we don't pay attention to keeping the grid stable and reliable energy sources and up-to-date transmission and so forth and so on, then a grid that you can just go and turn on the light whenever you want to, or a grid where your food in the refrigerator will probably not go bad because you have such a long power outage or whatever, that might be something we tell our kids about the good old days. And I don't want that to be the case. I mean, that's often the case in countries where the grid is not kept up well, and I don't want that to be the case here. I haven't been really studying this, but I have seen analyses which show that the number of minutes of power failure has been rising in the United States. And of course, then you get the whole thing about like enroll in a demand response program. In other words, instead of waiting for the power to fail, enroll in a program that will allow you a little discount on your power, but it will allow the grid operator to shut it off when the grid is in trouble. So now you understand that businesses have always enrolled in demand response programs if it suits their business needs. It doesn't suit the business needs of very many businesses. If you remember in shorting the grid, where I talked about how they were paying for winter reliability, they were willing to pay for demand response, and they were willing to pay for the grid operator was willing to pay for oil stored on site and also for demand response. And somehow or other, they managed to pay for like $2 million in demand response and $20 million in oil stored on site. I'd have to look that up. My numbers might not be right. But the idea it was that not many businesses said, "Hey, yeah, right, absolutely. If it's really cold out, turn me off." That not many businesses signed up for demand response.
I think one of the interesting parts of your book is the fact that you cover different power market systems, because the one we are in today, it wasn't there always. I mean, before we came to that point of liberalizing and opening up for competition, auctions, and so on, we had a totally different system. And some of the problems with that system was that they actually overproduced power plants. They built. It made sense for them economically to build almost too many plants. And now in the current design we are in, it's almost the opposite. We are running out of the stable baseload plants, and so it looks a bit like we are heading towards the end of an era in the way power markets are organized. And of course, we've focused a lot on the negative sides of this, but could we try to go into talk a bit about what will the next system look like? Where are the opportunities? Because I imagine that eventually change has to come.
I don't know where the next opportunities are. I'm going to say that in general, the West will begin to understand the need for nuclear power, because they'll need a reliable kind of power, and they're very dedicated to being low carbon. And the emerging countries will go for a mixture of coal and nuclear. Nuclear's not as expensive in the emerging countries. It turns out that, South Korea can build a power plant in, I don't know, in Indonesia, say, for a fraction of the cost that we build a nuclear power plant here. I mean, really quite amazing differences. I mean, it's not just 50% of the cost, it's more like 20 to 30% of the cost. And so nuclear is, the expensive nuclear is mostly capital cost. So I think that we will be moving to nuclear as baseload in emerging countries. I would hope that we are also going to move to it here. I get quite concerned. I mean, countries have seen themselves as rich, and then they make some big decisions, and then they're not rich anymore. I mean, if you wanted to talk about a country that was gold for a long time, and really gold, that was Spain, right? It was Spain after the Americas were discovered. They were getting tons of gold, and they felt that gold, and they could buy everything they wanted. But when you get right down to it, Spain didn't try to build up its own industry. It was just like, wow, look at what's happening here. It's great. And I think that, other countries at the time, Britain was building its industry. We're building canals here, we're building railroads here. I mean, obviously, I'm talking 200 years later, but what I'm trying to say is that investing in infrastructure for your industry is important. I don't know how to say it. There's a very interesting a chapter in Tocqueville's Democracy in America, where he's on a boat on the Ohio River, and he looks south at the slave states and north at the northern states. I mean, Ohio is kind of the division, and he notices all the bustle and excitement in the north and all the people doing stuff, and in the slave states, kind of quiet. People can make bad, countries can make bad decisions.
Hmm. So you see nuclear power as a part of a new energy power market system, but how about will it be as centralized as it is today? Could we see a more decentralized system with smaller nuclear reactors, for example? Is that a part of what you see emerging?
I think that's part of what you see emerging, but when you get right down to it, everybody wants to have a microgrid. Okay, fine. But what happens when the one plant you own that is on the microgrid has to be refueled? Well, you better be attached to a bigger grid. And so pretty soon you come back to the way we run our larger grids, which is that no power plant is more than 10% of the top power demand on the grid. So if one power plant goes offline, it's not the end of the world. And you have a 20% backup of power plant, reserve margin of power plants. So, I mean, I get the whole microgrid thing, and I think that there will be a lot of businesses that will decide, I want my own nuclear plant here. Thank you. We'll have it. It's not going to be attached to your grid. We're going to, when the nuclear plant needs refueling, we'll get in a gazillion Generacs and do it, because that's better than attaching to your grid, which is so flaky.
Meredith, it's been a pleasure to discuss the power market with you. Thank you so much for this interview.
Oh, thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much.